Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about the Roman philosopher and a political statesman Boethius and his book written in 523 A.D. called The Consolations of Philosophy. Okay, so imagine this. Imagine that you find yourself, through no real fault of your own, locked in a prison cell, condemned to death. And suppose now that you have a year to wait there until your execution. So, what do you think you'd do? How would you deal with this inevitability? How and where would you find any comfort or consolation, if at all? Well, these are the sorts of questions Boethius explored in his book called The Consolations of Philosophy. You see, what happened to Boethius is exactly what I just asked you to imagine. What happened is that Boethius had led a privileged and reputable life, political life, until one day he was found guilty of treason. He was then thrown into prison for about a year until his eventual execution. Well, it was during this time that he wrote The Consolation, with his own situation as a condemned prisoner providing the context or setting. Okay, so The Consolation was written in prison where Boethius was waiting to be executed. Well, this raises an important question. Namely, what motivated him to write this text at this very late hour of his life? Well, obviously, as the title suggests, writing this book was surely a way of trying to come to terms with his own personal tragedy and his inevitable death. And by the way, I should mention that this sort of practice wasn't completely unusual. What I mean is that people back then, and in the ancient world more broadly, did write and read consolatory texts to try to console themselves. That's to say, to try to discipline their emotions and to give themselves some kind of a psychological calm or equanimity in the face of suffering and change of fortune. I mean, one place you certainly do see this is in the earlier ancient Greek thinkers, many of whose works were designed to teach how to maintain a detached and calm attitude through life's various challenges. I mean, here Socrates, through Plato, and Epicurus, and the Stoics like Marcus Aurelius come readily to mind. Anyway, so back to Boethius. So he wrote The Consolations as a way of dealing with his tragedy. And he probably wrote it, therefore, at least to begin with, in a state of deep turmoil. Okay, but, well, so what kind of form or structure did this writing take? Well, basically what Boethius does in the work is he sets up an imaginary dialogue between two characters in prison. The character Boethius, which obviously pretty much stands for himself, and the character that he calls Lady Philosophy. So this is the literary device that he uses in the book to play out the psychological drama that he was experiencing while in prison. And again, he uses this conversation between these two characters as a kind of therapeutic technique. That's to say, ultimately, he seems to do it with the aim of gaining a more detached and sagacious attitude towards his own tragedy. Okay, but now let's get into some more detail here because it's important. So, first, who exactly is this Lady Philosophy? Well, what she seems to be is basically she seems to be an allegory of human rationality. Or maybe more broadly, she seems to stand as a kind of symbol of the classical philosophical tradition. And what she's there for is to try to help Boethius alleviate his negative and irrational emotions and to try to deal with his tragic destiny. So really, maybe one basic way to understand the essential difference between the two characters is like this. It's to view Boethius as standing for the passions and the emotions, and Lady Philosophy as standing for reason or wisdom. And so the idea is that Boethius is someone who's tormented and being misled by his emotions, and Lady Philosophy is someone who's there to try to teach how reason can serve to rise above situations by controlling or even doing away with all emotion. Okay, so again, the central message seems to be that it's philosophy as reason that saves us. And the reason that Boethius is suffering is because he's forgotten philosophy. He's forgotten how to view things rationally or from the proper vantage point. In this sense, Lady Philosophy, through her commitment to reason, is a healer. And again, as I said earlier, this goes back to ancient philosophy as something that is at heart therapeutic and medicinal, with, of course, reason being the essential cure. Okay, but now you might be wondering something. You might be wondering, how exactly is reason supposed to help Boethius? How does philosophy as reason help those people in turmoil? Well, one thing, among many others, that Lady Philosophy stresses quite a bit to Boethius is this. What she says is that it is irrational to center life around transitory things like external goods. That's just to build your house on sand, she says. It's just short-sighted. It's to eventually and inevitably leave yourself vulnerable to frustration and disappointment. Losses are inevitable, and fortune is fickle and unreliable. The correct approach is to tend to the well-being and management of your soul. That way, when you lose things and fortune turns, you won't be caught unprepared. Ultimately, genuine happiness is not constituted by external things. Rather, it comes from inside of oneself. Okay, but all this said, there's actually something strange about the way the Consolations proceeds. And here I want to sort of question this traditional interpretation that I've just given. So, what's really strange, and this is something that other commentators have noticed, is that Lady Philosophy ultimately doesn't really seem to be super convincing on a purely logical or rational basis. And when you look closely, the actual arguments that she presents to Boethius don't seem to have the greatest substance or philosophical analysis. Now, the reason this is strange is because Lady Philosophy, as the common interpretation goes, is supposed to be the very personification of reason. Well, okay, but how can reason personified fail like this? How can it fail in regards to persuasion and structured philosophical argument and substance? Well, okay, here's the thing. Maybe this isn't quite the right way to interpret this work. Or at least maybe it's not the whole story. What I mean to say is that maybe it's not pure reason that's supposed to save us. I don't know, maybe the suggestion is it just can't save us. At least not all on its own. So maybe Lady Philosophy's real or more complete comfort or consolation takes a slightly different form. So, what could it be? Well, here's a thought. And again, it's one that's been raised by a few commentators. So maybe Boethius derives most of his consolation from simply having another person around to talk to. In other words, maybe it's just speaking to another person and being allowed to express your feelings that provides the most comfort and reassurance. And when you look at it, this is exactly what Boethius has Lady Philosophy do in this work. That is, she not only speaks to Boethius in a nice and trusting way, but she lets him talk for long stretches of time without stopping or interrupting him. Well, I don't know. Maybe this is what we all need most in our darkest moments. Maybe we don't need arguments, but we just need someone to be there and to talk with and to confess to, and someone to truly listen to us. And actually, maybe it doesn't matter all that much what someone actually says, but instead, what really matters is that they say it and how they say it. Actually, in a way, you might say that Boethius here sort of anticipates the likes of Freud's talking cure and Carl Rogers' active listening. So at the end of the day, maybe Lady Philosophy isn't meant by Boethius only as some kind of a strict allegory of reason and philosophy, but maybe she's created by him to be a person, someone with an authentic personal depth. Maybe Boethius figured out that the greatest consolation in the last hours of our life is, well, maybe it's just to have another human being in the room with us. Okay, well, you know what? Now that I think about it, there is something else that Lady Philosophy does for Boethius that doesn't involve a purely rational or philosophical analysis. What she does is she reminds him to think about his life and all of its happy moments and all of its privileges, and to be grateful for it. And this is sound advice, no? Greater than any philosophical argument, you might say. Because let's not underrate the power of gratitude. I mean, on the eve of our death, is there any greater healing influence than to be grateful for our past blessings? Of all the great virtues, I can't think of anything else more than gratitude that's capable of robbing the dark grave of its victory. Bye for now.